So, off the bat, I think for me, the first thing I did a piece over at the Reload analysis piece that sort of went through my thoughts on this. I think that there's two ballot initiatives, one in Iowa and Oregon, and the ballot initiatives are great because it's just you'll get to see what the voters want on the specific question. There's no sort of need to really deeply interpret what goes on there, but that's one to watch. Then you have there's a number of gubernatorial elections as well that I think are going to be really good parallels for gun policy because they're at the center of these races. You've got the Texas race, the Georgia race, and now the sort of a surprise one, the New York race has become very close. Let's start with Texas, though. You got Beto O'Rourke is running against Greg Abbott, and he's been, staunchly pro-gun control to the point where he is literally wants to take people's AR-15s and AK-47s. He doesn't think the public should be able to own those. And then on the other side, you have Greg Abbott, the Republican, who just signed, permitless gun carry into law there. He's expanded gun rights in the state, gun rights protections, loosened the gun laws. So it's a pretty stark matchup, right? And Beto has made this a top campaign issue, especially in the aftermath of the Uvalde elementary school shooting. But he doesn't seem to have made very much progress. The latest polling has him down 13 points, I think. And so what do you make of that race?
Yeah, so I want to take one step back and then we'll go a little bit of a deep dive in Texas when it comes to gun politics. It used to be when I started covering politics that there were pro-gun Democrats, they were NRA endorsed Democrats, and there were Republicans that voted for, the Brady bill back in the 90s and voted for gun control if they represented suburban states or suburban districts. So you really would have to watch like a lot of these individual races and really closely follow where the candidates are when it comes to gun policy, because there was a lot of diversity on gun policy within both parties' coalitions. That's not the case anymore. And I think a good rule of thumb, not just for this election, but in recent elections going forward as well, if Republicans have a good night, it's a good night for gun policy, gun owners, conservative views on gun less gun restrictions, less gun regulations. A good night for the NRA, a good night for gun rights groups. And we're looking at the very strong likelihood at this point that this is going to be a very good Republican night, where Texas, which is a Republican state, that governor's race is probably not going to be close. Governor Abbott is going to, if the polls are accurate and if the reporting I've done in that race is correct, it's going to be a pretty easy night for the Republican governor. And you're right. I mean, one of the issues with Beto O'Rourke is that he thought he was sort of capitalizing on the shifting winds within the new Democratic Party in Texas, where he ran against Ted Cruz and came closer than a lot of people expected. But the reality is Texas still has a very sizable gun-owning population, a very solid rural base of voters in the state. And there are other trends in Texas that have nothing to do with guns, like the Hispanic voters along the Rio Grande border that are becoming Republicans, and they used to be pretty solid Democrats. So, the issue of gun policy is not one that's a winning one for Democrats, and not one that's a winning issue for Beto. Beto has not gotten any traction since, even after the awful Uvalde shooting, where he had this moment, confronting Governor Abbott at that press conference. That did not get him additional support, and if anything, it may have cost him a little bit. And just playing to, if you're in Texas, if you're just playing to the suburban base, the urban base of the Democratic Party, if you're kind of catering to the voters that are most concerned about restricting gun access, that's not enough to get a majority in Texas. And the way the winds are blowing overall, you're looking at a pretty sizable Republican success story in Texas this year.
Yeah. Do you think that's the same? I mean, Texas seems like an easy one because you expect the Republican to do well. Now, Beto O'Rourke is supposed, as you just mentioned, is supposed to be like a new, invigoration for the Texas Democrats, but that's been the storyline for several elections now, and he hasn't actually pulled any of them off. But I don't think the same is really true in Georgia, right? You have a much more purple, voting bloc there these days. What do you make of that race?
Yeah, so Georgia's a more competitive state writ large, and obviously Democrats won those two Senate seats that got a whole lot of attention just about 2 years ago. But Georgia also has a very conservative rural base that still gets any Republican to 44 or 45%, if not more, even in a bad year for the party. So, and those are gun owning conservatives, a little writ large. If you're looking at like folks who own guns, all you have to do is look at some of those rural precincts across the state in suburban area. And it's not just the rural, but those are voters who will vote on the issue of gun control. It'll be a litmus test issue, and they're showing up and they're motivated. And then in the governor's race, you have a governor who first won election by running a campaign ad touting how committed to protecting gun rights he would be, and he won.
And to permitless carry, which he did, which he did end up signing.
That's right, and he passed legislation that gun owners cheered for, and then you have an opponent in Stacey Abrams who certainly toes the liberal or conventional Democratic Party line on gun control and gun regulations. And
she's attacked him for the permitless carry. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you're in a Republican year at a time when the winds are at the Republican Party's back. It's tough to be someone who's to the left on that issue. And it's tough to see, it's still tough to see if a Democrat is sounding too liberal on gun policy, how they can win a state like Georgia, how they can win a state like Texas. It did happen in the Senate race in 2021 in those runoffs, but it took a confluence of factors for that to happen.